Hello everyone! Today we are going to do something I never thought that I'd do, and that is talk about sex on the internet. And yes, this is going to be applicable to my own lived experience as a married woman. What helped my sex life is not something you would ever find in Cosmopolitan. That's what the kind of thing you want to see, then definitely keep watching. Hit the like button now just so you don't forget, and also subscribe so you don't miss more videos to help you find freedom from feminism. So let's get started. To begin, we're going to have to kind of define what makes great sex. I'm coming at this from a point of view that great sex starts first with your own mindset, but then also the relationship that you have with the other person. And my premise of this whole video is that feminist influence has made sex not good. So I'm kind of trying to make sex great again. In married relationships, I will add, as I am a Christian, and really what I'm going to say, it is necessary to have that kind of commitment. But I'm going to explain why. And if you don't believe that, I would just encourage you to hang with me and just hear me out and see if maybe there is some wisdom you want to glean from this in your own way, at least. So with feminism, their mindset around sex there's different types of feminists, right? So there's the sex positive ones that are more the sexual liberation movement kind of people, and there are the more sex negative ones, which I would say are the ones more of today, where it is constantly I'm being raped. And I'm not talking about the people who it's just false accusations trying to get back at somebody, but I do believe that there is this idea that's being promoted in feminism that says men are in general rapists, and that's why we need to teach them not to rape, and women should be on guard. Women are likely going to be taken advantage of, and that is just a sad thing about being a female. You know, and when you're coming at it from this mentality, it is not going to lead to great sex. And the view that feminism has is that overall sex is very oppressive and it's a tool of the patriarchy. There was actually a commenter on my channel. I cannot find this dadgum comment, but we actually had a conversation, and she was well spoken, but was very scholastic and quoting all these people. And she did have a quote about sex being oppressive. And I asked her, are you saying that sex between consenting adults is oppressive? And she said yes. So that's what more extreme feminists believe, but some of these ideas still come into play and manifest themselves, sometimes even subconsciously, with women who don't even identify as feminists. And that is exactly what happened to me. I'm going to give you 4 specific examples. So the first one is that you shouldn't have sex if you aren't totally feeling it. So this is just very likely to happen, okay? Like in some kind of actual relationship, and especially in a married relationship where you've been with somebody for years and you're busy, especially once you start having kids, it's easy to have this become a habit. And I'm going to talk later about my view of what will help solve this problem, but first I'm just going to talk about what feminism says about it, and it's that you are being violated, and it's a horrible notion that you should go ahead and proceed if you are not totally enthusiastically right there. And I would argue that this is not a good thing. Let me do the disclaimer of I am not talking about any kind of physical forcing of sex or anything like that. But what I am talking about is I'm kind of tired. I don't know, I'm not turned on right now. Those things can change. Your attitude can change. Your perspective can change as you kind of roll with it if you're coming from a positive place. But if you're coming from, this is a violation of my human rights, for this guy to even suggest it when I, said that I was tired, it's not going to go well. The second manifestation is that you shouldn't do things to please your man, whether that's sexually inside the bedroom, whether that's outside the bedroom, and just as far as attractiveness goes. No, don't put on that sexy black dress that he loves Only dress how you want for you. But like, is this the making of a great intimate relationship where you're both serving each other and there's this give and take? No, that's not. And so feminism, though, like chops that off. So that's going to create strain in your relationship, because guys open up and feel more comfortable if somebody is there like wanting to please them and loving on them. And that's not loving on them if you refuse to do those things. And I'm not talking about any kind of sinful thing in the bedroom, but I am saying if there's something that is not sinful that maybe you're not super into, but he really wants to try, perhaps it's an idea to go ahead and, say, okay, like, we'll give it a go. I'll try it, and be more explorative, and to not be so me, what do I want, and assuming that it's rape if it's not exactly what you want, and if it stretches your comfort zone in any kind of way. So my problem with a lot of the feminist thinking is that I believe it just lacks discernment between, okay, this guy just beat you up and is now forcing you to have sex with him, and a guy wants you to dress up in a, in a sexy outfit or something. I mean, not saying feminists necessarily think that's bad. I don't really want to give examples. Okay, but anyway, but when a woman is so hesitant to do anything to please their man, I believe that's actually very disrespectful of him and of his desires. And often what can happen is, with this kind of more feminist environment in the world and culture, it's easy for women to like laugh at and discard and invalidate a man and what he thinks and what he wants, or even to make him to act like he is some kind of horrible, deviant, awful person for wanting something that's not sinful in your monogamous relationship. And that's not good. And that's not going to create an environment for emotional intimacy. That's going to create the opposite effect. And that's what feminism is doing. And I think that that's bad. Okay, so I actually realized my third one is pretty much my second one, so I kind of talked about both. But then the fourth one is, you don't have any kind of responsibility as a wife to overcome a low libido or reluctance towards, again, non-sinful sexual things. So this is sort of wrapped up in some of those other ones, but the idea is, even in the Christian church, where there are scriptures that I'll talk about later that kind of encourage sexual exploration and sexual enjoyment and a higher frequency of sex, even in the Christian church, despite those scriptures, I believe there is this idea of like, hey, if I am the way I am. It's this leftist thinking of, however you are born, there is no transformation. And again, like, let's have some reasonable discernment to realize that we do have some kind of control over ourselves, and our choices affect our mentality affects our feelings affect our action, and it affects your destination and your destiny and where you end up in your life, in your marriage, in your sex life. So yeah, I would argue that as a wife, like, we actually do have a responsibility to, in some kind of graceful, loving way, develop sexually, instead of saying what's there is there, and if I'm not into something, if I don't like something, if I'm not good at something, if whatever, like, it is what it is, I can't do anything about it. Like, I mean, honestly, I think you can also almost bring God into it a little bit. Like, some of these things could really impact your marriage in a big way. And maybe you actually need to even pray about it. And actually, I'd say that before any of that, you should always be praying about things easily. You don't have a limit on how much you can pray about things. So an example of this was, I actually found this on a Christian blog that was saying something about sex. And there was this person who commented about she apparently had great boobs, but she had like this strange, very intense aversion to having her boobs touched. And her husband was a boob guy, married a girl with great boobs, but she hated it if he touched them. And this is in a marriage, and she's just like, why can't he just not do it? And it's like, maybe there could be a little bit of give and take there, where sure, he shouldn't, totally force himself, and perhaps she needs counseling. There probably was some kind of traumatic thing that happened, but perhaps it could be worked through. But the idea of he needs to just change. His desires are invalid because it sounds like, oh, you're just sex obsessed, you're just whatever, and it's like, you know what? I think that's a reasonable thing for a man to want to touch his own wife's breasts, especially when he's particularly a boob guy and she has the body for it. Like, it seems like a match made in heaven, except for this situation. So those are some of the ways that I've actually seen in conversations with myself, with things even on Christian blogs. I've seen women being affected by feminism in those 3 or 4 ways, however many you want to classify it as. And I'm going to also just list off some of the ways that the more extreme radical feminists, how it ends up manifesting for them. If a man tries something or even suggests something that you find distasteful, he has violated you. We could be talking about sexual assault, sexual or rape if he tries something. Even in marriage, there is no implied consent. So there's still marital rape. And again, we're not talking about physically abusing somebody, then forcing them, something like that. Just I'll link the article that I talk about a lot where as feminists just didn't want to have sex, didn't feel like she was connecting with him emotionally, so she wanted to withhold physically. And that actually gets into the next one. Even within a consensual agreement, within a marriage, it can still be rape. And so they had a crappy arrangement. This is an example of crappy feminist sex, where he couldn't kiss her, she could read a book. But she would allow him to use her body. And it was just a very strange dynamic. And I don't know what is going on with that husband, that he would, that this would somehow how could you even be turned on in that? I'm not sure. I don't think that all men could. I do wonder if it's a little bit different kind of man that's going on the left. I don't think many conservative men would be going with that situation. But anyway, it's a disturbing thing, an example of feminists having crappy sex, and an example of why would we listen to this person who has that kind of situation? Why, here's this feminist. And then there's other examples of some of the, I should have looked up before I did this, but some of the person who wrote The Feminine Mystique, her and her husband were physically abusive to each other, and they ended up being divorced. I mean, she was not a typical suburban housewife who loved her husband, or the husband loved her and she respected him. It came from dysfunction, and then their whole worldview comes from dysfunction, and then they try to project it out onto everybody. So that's a whole different situation. And these are the people trying to affect our relationships and how men and women interact with each other and conduct themselves even within marriage. That's not who you want to get your advice from, people. What if you break down those beliefs and shift it to a more sex positive point of view? And I believe that this is really only possible when you have a real relationship with the other person. And I believe that God has given us an outline that creates the best environment for the best and most frequent sex. So there is that stereotype of married sex, or Christian sex, or Christianity is sex negative. And that's just not what's actually found in the scriptures. That is a deception, which I believe is ultimately from Satan, the enemy, as he is the master of lies and he is a deceiver. And that has led people to say, well, maybe we can find a better way. But the other way, the sex liberation way, was not good. And then that only ended up resulting in this sex negative mindset. But there is a way. So God has boundaries that make sex better from both your mindset and relationally. So first off, it starts even before marriage, where there's wisdom in the qualities that really matter for a spouse. And it encourages men to be men and women to be women, and both to be virtuous and desirable. It encourages women to respect men and men to love women, and it warns men against provocative women or promiscuous women, which was the word I was looking for. And it just encourages a whole different dynamic that, if followed, you end up being in a relationship with somebody who you can relate to emotionally, that you are attracted to physically, but it also goes deeper than that, and that creates a real beautiful intimacy. There's also Song of Solomon, which is a whole book of the Bible that, I'm not going to lie, I honestly still feel a little uncomfortable reading it, but whatever. But it talks about doing things that a lot of Christians say you're not even allowed to do. So, I'm not saying it's not possible for Christians to ever get legalistic. What I'm saying is that if you really want the truth, what you have to do is read the Bible yourself to figure out what it's really saying. And then the verse that I want to point out is 1 Corinthians 7:5. I have it up here on the screen. And what that does is it protects sex frequency. And it does so without the risks. Because if you think about kind of more modest, like 2 times a week for married sex, time, in a whole year, that's 100 times a year. And that is with one person. And over decades. That's a lot of total sex. But imagine if you're doing that with hookup culture and it's a new partner each time. I mean, I don't think you need to be a conservative to say that thousands of partners is probably not a good idea. Talk about STDs, even if you're trying to be careful and safe or whatever. That is a lot of people. And the people that you're hooking up with have all done it with a lot of other people too. So you just have to be aware of that. And then also, as far as children and pregnancy goes, within a marriage, it's a blessing. It's a gift from God. You have the situation that makes that a positive experience. But even with all the government welfare, you're never going to make a single mom's pregnancy experience be the same as that of a couple that has been praying for their child. Additionally, in the Bible, there's this concept, this overall theme of being a servant to others, and especially to your spouse. But there's this idea where it's not this power struggle. It's not this constant, I'm trying to be up top and that is my goal, oppressor versus the oppressed, and I'd rather be the oppressor than the oppressed. No, it is about bowing, having humility and serving each other. And in a marriage, when both people are giving 100%, trying to add value to the marriage, that is what makes it go, and that's what makes it grow. Additionally, there's the concept of, in marriage, becoming one flesh. And so it's not about my body, my time, my this. You work as a team, and that creates intimacy. But then that also creates a situation where you can be much more comfortable with each other. You have that. You work as a unit, and that kind of and that's like a warm up for the physical intimacy. That's the expression of that unit that you've become in your marriage. And another point is just about time and having margin for rest. God created the Sabbath, and he did that way back in the 10 Commandments, and he was trying to help the Israelites not come from this slave mentality from when they were in bondage in Egypt. And he did this because he knew that they would keep trying to work too much, because that is the world's wisdom. But God talks about rest, and God created different roles for man and women so that the man can provide and create the money and those resources, and the woman can reduce the stress and make life just more worth living. In the Proverbs 31 woman, she is feeding her family well, she's clothing them well, she's doing these different things that help make their life not just a hamster wheel, but makes it enjoyable. And when you're coming from this place where you have less stress in your life, you have more margin, you are not both trying to be the alpha, making all the money, and this is what you're doing, and then you're like, my kids are annoying because I don't have any energy for them and I haven't raised them up properly. That's not an environment that creates good sex. The relaxed environment, the less stressful environment is what creates good sex. That's what creates a situation where you're not always too tired and you don't always have a headache. So yes, God is good. His wisdom is good. And even if you don't accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, which I hope you do, or at least really look into this, I believe that this is wise advice for anybody, and anybody can benefit from this. Any woman can watch this video and try to find freedom from some of the feminist ideology and things that are affecting how she's viewing relationships and sex and marriage. And I believe men can do the same thing, but this is going to impact women if, as they see men who don't believe that this monogamous married relationship with actual intimacy is better. Because to be honest, it can feel like a little bit of a vulnerable position of, trying to be the more beautiful and virtuous or whatever, but then it's like, can you stand up against the immediate self-gratification of just hotness, or somebody who's just really promiscuous and they're just sexy, and that may in the moment draw a guy's eye away, and then if women see that enough, then they're like, well, I should be that instead of really beautiful and virtuous and worthy of marriage. And that's not the message you want to communicate to women. And women, don't fall for that, because the thing is that it ultimately hurts women when they try to play the game of hookup culture. So don't be deceived in that way. So find freedom from feminism and have better sex. If you agree with that, then like this channel, and also remember to hit the subscribe button so you do not miss a video. Leave your comments on what your take is, and if you think feminism makes sex suck. All right, have a good day. Bye.